At 4 o'clock in the morning, thousands of kilometers from Ukraine's trenches, Russia's war machine was suddenly forced to look over its shoulder. Explosions were no longer confined to the battlefield, the war had reached deep inside Russia itself. On August 15, Ukrainian long-range missiles struck the JSC Rocket and Space Center in Samara, roughly 920 kilometers from the front. This was not an ordinary industrial target, it was part of the infrastructure supporting Russia's space ambitions. The facility traces its history back to the Soviet era. It helped produce the Soyuz 2 launch vehicles that carried satellites into orbit, continuing a legacy that connected Russian military power, communications, intelligence, and space operations far beyond the battlefield. That is what made the strike so significant. Russia's war increasingly depends on networks above the battlefield. Satellites, communications, navigation, and reconnaissance damage one part of that chain, and the consequences can travel hundreds of kilometers without a single soldier crossing the border. The pressure intensified after Russia lost access to Starlink. Moscow began searching for alternatives, including its reported efforts toward a domestic low-Earth orbit communications constellation. If successful, such a system could strengthen Russia's ability to connect drones and battlefield equipment. But building a satellite network is one thing, building the electronics, launch capacity, terminals, software, and supply chains behind it is another. Russia faces serious technological constraints, while cooperation with China remains a possibility that could reshape the contest above the battlefield. Ukraine's strategy is becoming increasingly clear: do not fight every Russian system where it is strongest, force Russia to defend everything. Military bases, refineries, logistics hubs, ports, warehouses, and strategic infrastructure are all becoming potential pressure points. Then came Luga. On the night of August 13, Ukrainian drones targeted Russia's Baltic Sea port. The facility handles crude oil, petroleum products, fertilizers, and other exports. Every disruption there threatens more than equipment, it threatens the flow of Russian revenue. The location had already experienced attacks earlier in the year. Now another strike sent the message deeper into Moscow's calculations. Protecting the front line is no longer enough. Russia must defend the economic arteries feeding the war from thousands of kilometers away. Near Moscow, another fire erupted at a Wildberries logistics hub. The flames were more than spectacular. Images on social media. Logistics centers connect factories, banks, suppliers, retailers, and ordinary customers. Damaged the network, and the economic shock spreads outward. Wildberries is deeply embedded in everyday Russian commerce. Small businesses depend on its distribution network to move products. If warehouses burn and supply chains collapse, the impact can reach people who have never seen a battlefield and never expected the war to touch them. And then there is the banking system. Large logistics projects require financing. Companies borrow, banks lend, insurance absorbs losses until it cannot. A campaign against infrastructure can therefore create a second battlefield, one fought through debt, disruption, lost revenue, and financial confidence. On August 19, another major target came under attack: the Ufa refinery. The facility has been targeted before and processes enormous quantities of crude oil. Every refinery strike raises the same uncomfortable question inside Russia: how much infrastructure can Moscow protect simultaneously? Farther south, Ukraine is also attacking the routes connecting Russia with occupied Crimea. Trains, trucks, fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, and military vehicles moving through the rear are increasingly exposed. The battlefield may be 1,000 kilometers long, but logistics remain its bloodstream. That is why the so-called land bridge matters. If Russia cannot reliably move fuel, ammunition, troops, and equipment toward Crimea and the Eastern Front, its frontline units become increasingly vulnerable. Ukraine does not need to destroy every convoy, only enough to make movement dangerous. Then Moscow faced another enormous drone wave. Russian officials claimed hundreds of Ukrainian drones approached the capital and that air defenses intercepted them, but the scale of the reported attack immediately triggered debate over Ukraine's objectives and the cost of saturating heavily defended airspace. Moscow as Russia's fortress. Air defense systems have been concentrated around high-value targets, creating overlapping protective layers, but those defenses depend on early warning. Russia's F-50 aircraft can provide that warning, scanning huge areas before hostile drones reach the capital. The problem for Russia is simple: there are only a limited number of F-50 aircraft available. Several have been lost or damaged during the war. Every aircraft removed from the equation reduces the warning network. Moscow needs to coordinate its defenses effectively. Yet even the strongest shield cannot guarantee perfection. Russian officials can report interceptions, but explosions were still reported around Moscow in this war. One drone getting through can be enough. A single successful strike can force an entire defense network to rethink its assumptions. And while Russia was defending Moscow, its own missiles were pounding Kyiv. On August 16, Russia launched a major missile attack involving Iskander missiles. Ukrainian air defenses struggled against the ballistic threat, exposing one of Kyiv's most dangerous weaknesses. Then came an even larger barrage. On August 20, Russia combined cruise missiles and Shahed drones in a massive attack. Residential buildings, industrial facilities, and a children's hospital were among the reported sites hit, turning another night into a test of Ukraine's defenses. The pattern is brutal. Russia uses drones to overwhelm and distract cruise missiles, follow ballistic missiles, exploit gaps that Ukraine cannot easily close. Kyiv's defenders are forced to make impossible choices: protect civilians, shield infrastructure, or preserve scarce interceptors for the next attack. Russian strikes also reached Odessa and Zhytomyr. Newer Russian cruise missile systems have reportedly appeared alongside older weapons. Meanwhile, bridges around Sloviansk have been targeted because they are essential for moving supplies through Ukraine's defensive belt. This is no longer a simple exchange of missiles, it is a war of systems. Ukraine attacks Russian fuel and logistics. Russia attacks Ukrainian infrastructure and air defense capacity. Both sides are searching for the one weakness that can turn a battlefield stalemate into a breakthrough. Ukraine's biggest vulnerability remains ballistic missile defense. Kyiv possesses capable air defense systems, but there are not enough interceptors to protect every major city and strategic site. Russia knows this, and that knowledge is shaping the weapons it chooses to launch. North Korean ballistic missiles have reportedly entered Russia's arsenal as Moscow searches for additional ways to maintain its strike campaign. The result is a dangerous combination: drones as decoys, cruise missiles for reach, and ballistic weapons designed to overwhelm defenses. Yet Ukraine continues striking back. Russian refineries burn, logistics facilities are hit, warehouses become targets deep inside Russia. Every successful attack forces commanders to divert air defenses, security personnel, aircraft, and resources away from the front line. On the ground, however, neither side has achieved a decisive breakthrough. Ukraine has counterattacked in parts of Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions, while Russian forces continue pushing in other sectors. Positions change, but the overall battlefield remains brutally contested. Around Kupiansk, fighting remains intense. Ukrainian reinforcements have strengthened positions on the city's northwest side, while Russian forces continue searching for openings. Every village, tree line, and road becomes another piece in a much larger tactical puzzle. In other sectors, Russian forces have made infiltrations and captured villages, threatening Ukrainian positions, but encirclement claims have appeared before and failed before. Ukraine has repeatedly allowed Russian units to advance, then used concentrated forces to attack exposed positions. And behind the battlefield, another confrontation is unfolding. Political. Former Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has emerged as a critic of President Volodymyr Zelensky, accusing the government of corruption and warning that Ukrainian democracy faces pressure from Russia. For Zelensky, the challenge comes at a sensitive moment. Corruption allegations remain politically explosive, yet investigations and arrests involving figures close to the government also demonstrate that officials can still face scrutiny. The question is whether those actions will restore trust or fuel more criticism. Umerov's criticism can therefore be read two ways. Supporters may see it as necessary pressure on government, opponents may see the timing as the beginning of a political campaign. Either way, Ukraine's military struggle is increasingly connected to its battle for political credibility. Then Britain's involvement entered another chapter. A British-designed drone reportedly appeared in operations against Russian territory. Moscow responded with threats of consequences, repeating a warning it has issued after previous Western weapons reached Ukrainian forces. The pattern is familiar: tanks brought warnings, fighter jets brought warnings, long-range missiles brought warnings, yet the conflict continued. The real question is no longer whether Russia will threaten consequences, but where the next escalation boundary actually lies. Then came the Nord Stream mystery. German investigators are still trying to determine who sabotaged the pipeline in 2022, and a Ukrainian diver was arrested in Croatia as part of the investigation, but nationality alone does not establish responsibility. Intelligence operations are built around deception, intermediaries, and deniability. Russia could be responsible, Ukraine could be responsible, another actor could be involved. Until evidence survives a courtroom, the truth remains hidden behind layers of competing claims. The question of European air defense is equally urgent. France and Italy operate the SAM/T family, including newer versions designed to provide stronger protection against ballistic threats, but delivering a few launchers is not enough. Ukraine needs radar networks, trained crews, command systems, intelligence, maintenance, and interceptors. Every missile defense battery is part of a much larger ecosystem. Without that ecosystem, even sophisticated weapons cannot create an impenetrable shield. So why does Ukraine strike deep inside Russia instead of concentrating everything near the front line? Because the front line is already saturated with drones. Hundreds or thousands of unmanned systems can be operating across the battlefield, but small drones cannot destroy every hardened position or supply network. That is where larger weapons matter. Glide bombs, missiles, and long-range drones can reach targets far behind the trenches and create effects that frontline FPV drones simply cannot. And the final question may be the most dangerous one: will Russia mobilize more troops? Moscow is already absorbing enormous losses while trying to recruit enough soldiers to sustain operations. A larger mobilization could provide manpower, but it could also deepen social and political pressure inside Russia. The Kremlin must balance battlefield demands against public tolerance. More soldiers could strengthen the front. They could also bring the war even closer to ordinary Russian families. That is the real shape of this war now. Ukraine is trying to stretch Russia across a battlefield that reaches from the trenches to refineries, ports, warehouses, railways, financial institutions, and even space infrastructure. Russia is responding with missile barrages designed to exhaust Ukraine's air defenses and damage the networks keeping its economy and military alive. Neither side has broken the other, but every week, the battlefield gets larger and leaves one terrifying question hanging over the next phase. If Ukraine can keep reaching deeper into Russia while Russia continues overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses, which side will crack first? Will Moscow protect its cities, refineries, logistics hubs, and space infrastructure, or concentrate everything on the front? And if Putin chooses another major mobilization, will it finally change the battlefield, or simply make the war's enormous cost impossible for Russia to hide?